Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. Today I am joined by Dr. Meeta Singh. Dr. Singh is somebody I wanted to have on the podcast for a number of years. We've conversed a lot on Twitter. She adds a lot of value on there, so I'd definitely recommend heading down to the show notes and following her on Twitter. In this episode, we discuss a number of things related to athletes and sleep. We kick off the episode with Dr. Singh's journey into sleep medicine and sleep and performance. And we also discuss some of her work around NFL and elite professional sports teams in the US and indeed across the world. Dr. Singh also discusses things like sleep medication, melatonin, when and where to use it, jet lag strategies, recovery from games, and much more in this episode. We kind of geeked out, and what you didn't hear in this episode is probably the additional 45 minutes of chat after the episode, which was very interesting and intriguing as well. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to hear more from Sleep4Performance, head over to www.sleep4performance.com.au. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Sleep4Perform, and if you want to get in contact with me, it's Ian Dunican at sleep4performance.com.au. You can scroll down to the show notes and follow us there. On with the episode.
Exercise and diet are well established in society as two pillars for optimizing our health. However, both are supported by a foundation that is often forgotten, yet even more integral to our health, namely sleep. The Sleep Recovery Specialist course is an innovative online education experience that provides an in-depth knowledge base, important sleep assessment tools, and a wide range of effective strategies for supporting clients to improve their sleep habits and behaviors. Improve your sense of happiness and well-being, daily energy and alertness, recovery from physical training, reduce risk of obesity and diabetes, and reduce your appetite and sweet cravings. Achieve all of this and more. For further information and to enroll online, please visit www.nordicfitnesseducationblog.com.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mark Bubbs, and I'm excited to announce my new book, Peak, The New Science of Athletic Performance That is Revolutionizing Sports, is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters Indigo, and local booksellers before its release on May 24th. Peak is a groundbreaking book exploring the fundamentals of high performance, not the fads, the importance of consistency, not extreme effort, and the value of patience, not rapid transformation. Peak explores the leading experts, such as Dr. Ian Dunican, who are influencing the top performers in sports on how to achieve world-class success. What are performance professionals saying about Peak? Dr. Rocco Monto, orthopedic surgeon, Team USA physician, and author of The Fountain, says, Peak is a masterpiece of nutritional science from one of the world's leading authorities of athletic health and performance. It's a fantastic resource that provides a roadmap to reaching true wellness. Kelly Olynyk, forward for the NBA's Miami Heat, says, a must-read for athletes and everyone alike. Peak is an immeasurable tool to becoming the best you can be. And Dr. Fergus Connolly, PhD, performance expert and author of Game Changer and 59 Lessons, says, Peak is one of the most impressive and detailed books on applied sports science ever published, a must-have for any practitioner in performance. Regardless if you're trying to improve your physique, propel your endurance performance, or improve your team's record, Peak is about being an expert in the fundamentals and assumes that while top athletes are born, they can also be made. Pick up your copy of Peak today.
Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. This evening, my time, and for the morning, in your time, if you're in this part of the world, I am joined by Dr. Meeta Singh. Meeta, how you doing? Finally, we meet, we speak.
Yes. We have communicated in the past on the web, huh?
That's right. It's really interesting because there's a number of people I have, a lot of people like to bag out social media, lots of people who are extreme left on Twitter. There's lots of outrage on Twitter. But I think it's a bit like choose your own adventure. I choose to follow just lots of scientists, and I've met some great people on Twitter and conversed with them, and you're one of them. We have only conversed, I think, on Twitter. We've had one or two emails, but we've been sharing stuff, commenting on stuff, people like yourself, Michael Gradner, and more.
Yes,
And basically,
yes.
Twitter has facilitated that. So I think it's really interesting. Whilst people kind of get pissed off or be outraged by Twitter, I think if you choose the right people to follow and interact in the right circles, it can be really useful.
Right. And you know what? The one thing I find is actually Twitter really helps me to find out what the latest research is coming out, because a lot of the scientists will post what they are talking about. And one generally doesn't have time to read the entire journal, but if I know there's an article that's of interest to me and I find it on Twitter, of course I'm going to read it.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I can't be sitting there trolling through databases every day, but if I scroll through Twitter
Yes.
and I choose the right people to follow, I will see either a good tweet or a retweet, and generally I will pick up a lot of the up-and-coming, sleep science papers or in the performance field. So I fully agree. You can use it. You can use these forces for good, not evil.
This is true.
So, Meeta, where with a name like Meeta Singh, obviously it's not American. You're based in the US. Where does that name originate from originally, and how did you kind of get into this whole area of sleep medicine? Bit of a big, broad question, but probably
Yes.
the first part is your background with that name. Obviously coming from a different location. Can you give us a bit of background on your kind of family history?
Sure. My name's of Indian origin. I'm from North India, but I did my medical school and then did a psychiatry residency at the Mayo Clinic, which is in Rochester, Minnesota. And then after that, met my husband, came to the Henry Ford Sleep Disorder Center to do a sleep medicine fellowship. And this was, I'd like to say 1,000 years ago. So I've been in clinical practice since 2005. And, Henry Ford is really, it's a unique place to practice. I'm part of this multidisciplinary team of sleep specialists, and we see patients with sleep disorders. And we also have, in addition to clinical practice, we have a large research center, and we rank among the top funded centers in the country for the study of normal and abnormal sleep processes, insomnia, shift work, sleep medications, the long-term effects of sleep medication, the effects of drugs and alcohol on sleep. So, it really is a really interesting place to work at. And of course, personally, I have an interest, and some would say an expertise and experience in working with professional athletes and teams. And this really sort of started about a few years ago. I started working with the local NFL team, and subsequently with the other sports teams in the local Detroit area. And as you are aware of, people who work in these teams, the coaches, the athletic trainers, they'll often move around. They'll go join newer teams, and they would call me from that and ask me to come work with the new teams. And that's how I started working with multiple teams and really all the major sports league all around America.
So if you say you've been in this area for nearly 1,000 years, let's rewind 2,000 years. When you were growing up and going to school, and we put you back in your head when you were maybe 12 or 13, is this something you wanted to do, or did you have different aspirations as a young lady?
Well, thinking that far back, I don't think being a sleep physician was really on my mind. I have to say, though, I've always been a good sleeper. But joking apart, right around in medical school, especially when I trained, there was really minimal information about sleep and sleep. I'm sure you've heard that from other sleep scientists. Yeah. So sleep really started getting a lot of attention. Sleep science has been around for a few years. I don't know if you've heard about Kleitman, who's like the grandfather of sleep medicine, and he did this. He went into the Mammoth Caves and looked at circadian rhythms. I think it was in the 1950s where REM sleep was discovered. I know Dr. Thomas Roth, who I work with at Henry Ford, came to Detroit in the early 70s. And so it's been around for a while. Sleep medicine as a fellowship has been around for 35 years. Well, I was in my final year of residency training, so I sort of came to it late, not in medical school, more so in residency training, discovered sleep medicine, and I've been hooked ever since.
Mm-hmm. I find this an interesting question to ask because over the last few months I've been asking guests, how did you get into sleep medicine or sleep science or sleep disorders? And it's really interesting because everybody comes in from a very unique path. So number one, nobody kind of goes, oh, when I was 14 I dreamt of becoming a sleep scientist. It was something I always wanted to do. So it's not that kind of sexy career like people go, yeah, I want to be a pilot, I want to drive fast cars, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to do all these cool things, I want to be an astronaut. No one ever kind of sits back and goes, I want to be a sleep scientist. I know I certainly didn't. And everybody that's come into the field has come in from these weird and wonderful paths. And what I think is good about that is that it brings, whilst we probably lack standardization, and we probably lack, in certain cases I think we lack standardization, but I think we're improving in those areas. But what I think it does is it brings lots of different thinking to the field and lots of really novel ideas and novel ways of tackling sleep as it relates to sleep disorders, as it relates to performance, as it relates to productivity, as it leads to into community safety on the roads. So I think it's really interesting how we all kind of, buy onto this kind of subject from different avenues, and we all have so much variation. And what's interesting that too as well is there's no like pathway to being a doctor of sleep, so to speak. Like you came through medicine, I came through, we'll say, military, mining, health and safety, and then into a PhD. So everybody comes from a really weird angle into it. So I find it really interesting. Do you find the same when you deal with people in this area?
Well, yes, but I will say though that in America, I think sleep science does have a lot of structure. So. Yes. So when it comes to PhDs and psychologists who do a lot of the research, they come into sleep science. They, typically work at large centers, and that's how they get. They earn their PhDs and start doing, research. But for physicians, it's the sleep science. The fellowship has been around for a few years. I know sleep medicine has been around as a separate medical specialization, has been around for a few years, and the sleep fellowship has been accredited. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has been around. And so once you've gone through medical school and have done your basic training, so you can be either internal medicine, family medicine, you can be a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a neurologist, even an ENT surgeon, you can choose to then super specialize in sleep medicine. And we have accreditation boards. So I am, for example, board certified in sleep medicine. I know in Europe and in other countries, it's not reached that status yet. So I'm going to say that we in America really have taken this and are far ahead.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And many countries obviously follow the American Academy of Sleep Medicine standards in terms of diagnosis of sleep disorders. And I think not too far behind that is probably Australia, because you have sleep and respiratory physicians here on the medical side. But what I do find interesting is in the field, when we start talking about, which we'll get into in a moment, is working with athletes or how we measure sleep in the field, how we work with shift workers. We've got many different people coming in from many different areas. And as we both know, and as we both have seen on Twitter, and as we both have seen in our respective fields, is that there's a lot of cowboys, so to speak, out there who are giving false information or measuring sleep, and there's lack of standardization around for people, it will say, in business. I think you're right. Around the sleep medicine side, the sleep disorder side, very well structured, particularly in the US. But I think when we get into the field, a lot of lack of standardization and a lot of issues, I think, where, either companies or teams or organizations or individuals basically just get sold a pack of lies, and it ends up being detrimental to them in the long term.
Yes. So another way to look at it is that sleep is a normal phenomenon, and everybody sleeps. If you spend about a third of your life sleeping, a lot of people will have issues with sleep, right? And we are now living in a 24/7 society. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a lot of snake oil peddling that goes on in the field of sleep. And, when we talk about athletes and, how complex these issues are, it's funny because, funny is the wrong word to use, but people would say I am an expert because I have the education behind it. Even when I'm dealing with them, I have to sit down and think through what solutions I'm going to offer. So, typing out whatever people do and say, well, glibly, they talk about, these are the things you should do. They're just not going to be sufficient for people, for it to be helpful.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you got to be kind of novel in your approach to the solutions as well, because every group is going to be uniquely different. And like you say, you got to think through those different issues. So athletes, for example, would be very different to people who are working, let's say, in mining. But then you might have more complexity in a mining operation because it might be in a remote area. People have got to fly there, stay there for 2 weeks, then come home. Or it may be underground, which brings in its own complexity because lack of natural sunlight. Then there's other, safety issues. But then on top of all of that, once you have that part sorted, then you got to take into account the business needs. What's the productivity requirements? How often does dirt need to come out of the ground? If we look at it from an athlete point of view, working with a team that plays 15 games a year is very different than a team such as in baseball who's playing 1, 2, 3 times a week and traveling. So there's all those different kind of factors that has to be calculated. And I think you're dead right. There's no one size fits all, and every problem has to be taken on its own merits, and every solution has to be developed uniquely to that problem.
Right. The other thing I think what happens is that so sleep physiology is sort of the same all over, right? All human beings have somewhat the same processes that are going on, but what happens is that when I start working with athletes, or you start working with minors, you learn more and more about that field. And the more you learn about it, the more of experience and expertise you gather in that specific field. And because these as you described, because these areas are so complex, then it becomes easier to focus on just one thing. Because now you know more about this than I do. And so therefore you should work more, or not, I shouldn't use the word should, but you will be more of an expert in this specific population versus I am, right?
Yeah, or application. Yeah, no, I fully agree, yeah. Which is a nice segue into, over the last few years, Meeta, you've been getting more and more involved with athletes, How did you get involved with these athletes, and what sort of teams, just so people know what level you're dealing with? Because I think it's quite impressive, some of the teams you've worked with, and it'd be worth letting the listeners eavesdropping on the conversation to know who the caliber of athletes you're working with.
Yeah, so I have worked with teams in the National Football League, the NBA, the Major League Baseball, as well as the NHL, I worked with like the NFL, this NFL Saints, the Detroit Lions. I've helped with travel planning with the Seattle Mariners. Is that me? I think. Okay, so the Mariners, the New York Mets, the Washington Nationals, the LA Angels. To speak of some, the Detroit Pistons, the San Francisco. The local NBA team, I'm blanking out on names now, but yeah. So and I have spoken at almost all of the the national meetings they have. I've spoken twice at the NFL Combine. I've spoken to at the NHL annual meetings. I've spoken at the Major League Winter Baseball meetings. But when it comes to speaking about the main sleep issues that athletic teams face, I think that although they're fairly complex, but broadly to help yourself, it's good to divide them into three main categories. And firstly, simply put, professional and as well as student athletes, because they face a unique lifestyle given their training and competition schedules, their frequent travel, the restrictions on personal life, this can cause them to be sleep deprived. And unless this is addressed early on in the season, this sleep deprivation tends to accumulate as the season progresses. Secondly, again, because of their travel and training schedule, there can be issues with the timing of when athletes are sleeping or are supposed to be awake. And this is often contrary to, misaligned with their circadian system, and this can cause sleep-wake disruption. So that is another large, broad category that I think of. And finally, of course, athletes and other team members can have individual sleep disorders or sleep issues that need to be addressed. So that's how I categorize issues that athletes may face.
No, this is quite interesting. So when we start talking about sleep and sleep physiology, and you speak about circadian rhythms a few moments ago as well, how would you define circadian rhythms for people who may not know what a circadian rhythm is? They may have heard of it, but not too sure what it actually means.
Okay, well, this is a really interesting topic, and I think will be interesting to your audience. So the circadian system is an intrinsic 24-hour long timekeeping system that our bodies have that basically modulates every physiological system. So in human beings, this actively drives wakefulness during the day, and at night it helps consolidate sleep. So there are a few interesting facts that you should know about your circadian system. So firstly, in human beings, your master circadian clock is located in your brain. And it's even though the rhythm is endogenous, which is, it's in the master clock, it's synchronized to your environment by light and dark of day and night. And in addition to this master circadian clock, we also have local clocks in almost every cell in our body, which are under they're under local control as well as they're controlled by the master clock. So your master clock functions like a master conductor. It's coordinating the timing and the function of all these clocks, and therefore all the functions of your body, right? The second thing to remember is that almost every biological function that we have is regulated both by the circadian clock as well as your sleep-wake cycle, right? So in a sense, these two controls, they've evolved slowly to ensure that the timing of the internal events in your body relative to each other and to the external environment are coordinated in such a fashion that it maximizes the survival of species. So it gives us a distinct biological advantage. So let me explain this a little bit further. So the actual time that somebody is awake and interacting with the external world, or should be asleep and avoid the external world, is actually a coordinated. And so in a sense, sleep is part of a survival strategy that ensures that animals will be engaged as well as disengaged from the environment at appropriate times during the night and day, right? And in our 24-hour/7 society, human beings, we are the only animal species that routinely ignores that biological clock, because we often are asleep or are awake when our biological clock is telling us to be asleep, and are often awake when our, vice versa. right? And this is really exemplified in athletes or that mining population you were talking about.
So let me ask you a question just here on this one, because this is actually just really timely. And I was having this conversation with somebody a few weeks ago in the oil and gas sector in a regional part of northwest of Western Australia. And they said, but can't I just get used to like working nights? This whole circadian rhythm thing, surely we must be able to flip it. Surely if I work enough nights, I can adjust my body and I can become a night person and flip it around, and all these things will just flip on their head 100%.
Well, the answer to that actually is yes. So research shows that, there's a lot of shift work. There are a lot of shift workers out there, right? But, and I don't know the exact percentage, I want to say about 10 to 25%, which is a large range, have shift work sleep disorder. So not every shift worker will have a sleep disorder, because if you are a night shift worker and you do night shifts on a regular basis, but in addition to that, when you're not working, so on your off days, you still try to keep the same shift. So you build your social and family life around that shift. Then then you can get adjusted to that. Does that make sense?
Yes, but here's the challenge. That's exactly, this is nearly exactly the answer I gave, which was, if you completely switch your life and you are up at night on your days off and you're constantly doing that, and you're not a rotating shift worker, and you're not going from days to nights, and you keep a whole schedule like that, which is highly unlikely in today's world.
Exactly.
And you manage your exposure to light and you do all these things, you will have a higher adaptation. But as a human being, you're a diurnal animal, and you're not meant to be awake at night. You're meant to be asleep. So you may have long-term negative health effects from doing it. But will you adapt? Probably better than most people if you switch your whole cycle. The answer is yes. But is that practical? Will you do it? The answer is most likely no.
Yes. So you would have to sort of live like a recluse, Yeah. So with that caveat, yes, you could do it. I mean, So the third thing to remember also, coming back to the physiology, is there is something called chronotype.
Yep.
So, which is a genetically predetermined predisposition that modifies whether individuals prefer to be more active in the morning. So they're either morning larks versus the evening, which is the evening owl or intermediate. And so for example, if you are a night owl, it might be easier for you to work that night shift, And, the thing to remember is that chronotypes are, I jokingly tell athletes, these are genetically driven, so it doesn't really matter how far you move away from your home. Your parents still decide what time you go to bed. So, given the fact that we have these circadian clocks in us, and given the fact that, given our chronotypes, there are very many ways in which circadian systems can affect athlete physiology, athlete health, athlete performance. So
with these clocks then, Meeta, you talk about like this kind of master clock in the head and the peripheral clocks throughout the body. One of the things then that might come up, and which is a kind of maybe controversial, but varying probably research outputs on this, is because these circadian clocks drive us so much, because we are athletes, or we have a lot of amateur athletes, serious amateur athletes that listen to the podcast, are always trying to optimize or work out what's the best time of day for them to train. Now, from a generic circadian biology point of view, physiology, there's data out there that says cognitive tasks, reaction time tasks, probably cognition tasks probably better in the morning, reaction time in the early to late afternoon, and then cardiovascular efficiency, function, and strength better off in the evening between 4 and 7 o'clock. Do you find that the circadian rhythms, or have you anecdotally seen that the circadian rhythms of any of these athletes, due to their chronotype, is affecting the time when they train, or is it completely driven by these external exogenous factors around timing of training?
Yeah, so That's a really important question. Because circadian rhythms regulate almost all physiological processes that are involved in athletic performance, therefore, there are certain times during a 24-hour period where peak performance is likely to occur, right? Based on your own individual circadian rhythms, right? And in fact, studies have shown, that in multiple different sports have shown that peak performance, especially peak athletic performance, occurs in the afternoon. So, for the general population as a whole, it's between 4 and 7 in the evening. And so, and you're right. So timing is really everything, right? You wake up in the morning. Yes, mental performance sort of peaks prior to noon. Then there's a slight dip in the mid-afternoon where there's a slump in our alertness. And then athletic performance with your greatest cardiovascular strength, greatest muscular performance, sort of peaks right around the time where your body temperature peaks, which is in the early evening, right around the same time where joint strength is supposed to be at its maximum, where flexibility should be at its maximum, and we've seen this in multiple sports. So I don't know if you've seen that data from the NFL that looks at 40 years of NFL data.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Right, it looks at evening games where the East Coast is versus West Coast, and they found that the West Coast beats the Las Vegas points spread and wins twice as often because the West Coast is playing at their biological peak performance. And then, yes, it's really interesting to take into consideration people's chronotype because people who are morning people will peak earlier in the morning, and people who are night owls will peak later during the day. And ideally, you want the time that you're biologically peaking to coincide with game time, right? Because that's when you want to be at peak performance. So yes, and this is work that I often do with athletes on an individual basis, is find out where they are and help tweak and adjust their circadian rhythms so that we can tweak their circadian rhythms to align with wherever the game time is going to be.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because we found out in previous research as well. If athletes are getting up very early on a day of training, such as maybe 6:30 in the morning, to go train at 7, but if we give them a day off and they're sleeping until 8:30, 9 o'clock, we know that these athletes then are basically not good at getting up at extremely early in the morning, or they're not this kind of a lark type chronotype. So we need to start pushing the training later to get better performance.
Well, yeah. If I may, we can talk a little bit further about this. This is really interesting, because what happens is your daily training or competition schedules are really planned for the entire team, right? So they're made for the entire team, but athletes' individual chronotype may not be aligned with the schedule. For example, a night owl who prefers to go to bed late and sleep in may not be able to fall asleep at the recommended time, right? And presents with insomnia, and then may wake up too early to train and compete, and so they don't get enough sleep. Or a morning lark who prefers to go to bed early and wake up early may not be able to go to bed early because they're busy because of game timings, but they still are wake up early because they're morning people. And then what you were referring to is this interesting phenomena called social jet lag. So social jet lag is when people go to bed later and wake up later on their days off versus when they're working. And this is really common amongst athletes who wake up early, for morning training or morning workouts. And when they're not working on, they're not playing, then they sleep in. And we know social jet lag is associated with poorer health overall and heart disease. But sometimes it can be the game timing itself that disrupts your sleep-wake cycle. So, for example, in Major League Baseball, they have night games which alternate with day games. And for the day games, the team needs to wake up about 3 hours prior to on some mornings as compared to when they have to wake up on night games. So, and that can be really difficult because now they're waking up at a time when they should be asleep. And then the other thing is that sometimes, sometimes teams have been doing things in a certain way for so long. So like in the NFL, the week leading up to the game, the expectation typically is that the teams, including all athletes, will be in the training facility at 6:30 or 7 in the morning for morning workouts or meetings. But the game on actual game day, the game may sometimes be in the evening. So, then players will sleep in.
This is a really interesting point because we found the same. So a couple of things just to kind of to bolster up your comments there. I think one is we found the same with like elite rugby. Similarly as well, during the week they'll train at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, but their games, 90% of their games are at night between 7:30 and 9:30 at night. So why kind of really center everything around early morning training when we're trying to peak performance for late in the evening? The second thing where I see this really exacerbated from an individual perspective is in two areas. One is in swimming. Swimming get up at ridiculously early morning times, but even at the elite levels where they have access to the pool themselves, they don't need to be booking in a swimming pool, but at the top levels. But that's driven back culturally from the sport where people used to train or do train based upon pool availability, swimming pool availability, and then, the coach's preference to train in the morning and have it done, and then come back in the evening. So you have this really early morning start and then a late swim as well in the evening, which is, reducing sleep. And people like Shauna Halson and Charlie Sargent have demonstrated this in a paper, which we did an audio abstract on, which basically shows that athletes are getting 5 or 6 hours sleep on these days. And the minute they don't train, they have a day off, they're increasing their sleep up to 7, 8, 9 hours to try and recover from it. And the one I see in the most, which is really frustrating, I think, is in combat sports athletes. So, for example, you deal with a boxer or a mixed martial artist, 90% of these fighters are going to have a fight at night.
Yes.
So what do? They've been watching Rocky movies too much. So they hit the alarm clock for 4 o'clock to get up because they want to train when everybody else is sleeping. It's a sign of weakness to be staying in bed. They get up and they run around and they're drinking raw eggs and they're, being tough. And then what happens is they're just basically exhausting themselves. So like I said to them, why are you training at 4, 5, 6, 7 in the morning when your fight is at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night? This is absolutely ridiculous. You are incurring a sleep debt. You are leaving yourself prone for injury in the preparation to your fight, and you are not optimizing your body to be ready for this fight time. So it's a really kind of a strange thing how we're influenced by the culture of the sport, specifically how we're influenced by the culture of TV. Like I have had athletes at the highest level say to me, yeah, but didn't Rocky get up in the morning? I'm like, that was a movie. Rocky wasn't real. We're not talking about Tyson Fury here, Deontay Wilder. They're real people, real athletes, people like Conor McGregor at the top of, UFC, MMA. Those guys, don't train till the afternoon. They often spar at 12 o'clock at night because their main event is going to be at 11:30, midnight. So they train at those times to replicate those conditions. Rocky was a movie, and Rocky 2 was a movie, and 3 and 4 and 5, and so on. It's a franchise. And then they start laughing and go, oh yeah, you're right, it was just a movie. Like, it is really interesting how we are influenced by these cultural things.
Yes. Well, so the bottom line is that the best way to prepare for an evening game is to live that life and do your training and your practices at the same time. However, so, that, yes, we all know it. But it's the same thing that comes about, when we were talking about how the best night shifter, best people who adjust to night shift are who live that life on a regular basis. But because, and you could make a point and say that, because they're night games, they live a they're like night shift workers, but oftentimes it's family obligations and social obligations that will result in the sleep wake. So I'll give you an example. So, a player goes to sleep at about 2 a.m, is done with their game, and really wants to sleep till about 10 or 11, but sometimes they want to wake up at 6:30 to be able to say goodbye to their children when they're going to school, or even drive them to school, right? So I've had this conversation with teams, and the pushback you get is that, well, that's the only time I can see my wife and my kids, and because they and this, especially this happens in the NHL and the NBA, where they play maybe like between 2 to 5 games a week, right? And most of these games are evening, occasionally afternoon games. But then, and of course, when these are young people, they're mostly night owls, and they like to sleep in, and they want to go to bed late. But then, sometimes they also want to be with their families, and their families live day lives because they have to go to school. Spouses or girlfriends might be working. And so you have to take that into account. And I think that's where the complexity comes in, because, on paper, this is the best practices. And I call it's like we have an expertise bias sometimes. It's like a blind spot, because on paper, this is what will look good and this is what you need to do. But if you make your solutions only based on scientific data and it doesn't fit into their life, they're not even going to read that piece of paper. They're going to throw it into a bin. And that's why you have to sort of compromise a little bit, and talk about, are there certain days I'd like you to, can you pick a few days where you can get up and, say bye-bye to your kids? Or are there certain days where you want to make sure you let your family know that you have to be selfish about your sleep? So it is a compromise.
Yeah, this is kind of like what I was saying at the start. Like when we deal with business, for example, a business wants to get an optimal roster, and it's got to be, it's got to meet all the scientific criteria. It's got to improve health and safety, but it's got to meet business needs. It's got to support productivity, and it's got to lower costs. On paper, the best roster is just not practical or achievable. So you're trying to search for that kind of keystone, or, to use a Harry Potter term, the Sorcerer's Stone that fits in the middle and makes everything happen. And it's not always going to be the perfect thing, but it's the best option that meets all those needs. And it's constantly a balancing act with organizations. So with teams, we have the same thing, and with organizations. But a question, Meeta, that comes up to me a lot, and there's two things that strikes me here about this is, one is I had an amateur athlete who's older now, who used to kickbox in Thailand a lot. Now he's doing more grappling, but he has a business as well and a family. He's been taking sleeping medication for 20 years and just is afraid to give it up because he thinks it helps him sleep. But alternative, on the other side of that, I come across more and more athletes who are trying to use either pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical type sleep medication to help them get to sleep. What's your guidance on sort of long-term sleep medication use or short-term transient sleep medication use in both camps, pharmacological and non-pharmacological, or pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical?
Well, so I think the best way to answer that question is actually to give some background information about what happens, like what the sleep issues are that athletes have, why they feel a need to take medication. So, and I know you are well aware of these reasons. So, in athletes, pre-competition anxiety or stress about the game itself can result in difficulty sleeping. And then once the game is done, athletes will often have difficulty falling or staying asleep. And in fact, that was one of the findings in your rugby players, right? You found that there were a few players who did not fall asleep at all after the game, right? And it's not surprising, because all that hyper arousal after the game, they have increased body temperature, they've used a lot of caffeine, which is still in their system, they have increased circulating levels of cortisol, their muscles may be aching, they may have pain, they may have injury, they may be stressed out about the game itself.
Yeah.
They've been under bright light, there's so much excitement after winning a game, or there's so much stress and anxiety after losing a game. All of these things will contribute to difficulty sleeping after the game.
Plus post-game socializing, alcohol, and so on.
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you, in my experience, I know, especially in America, because this is where I've had experience working with players. Players who are on stimulant medication for ADHD, they will take their medication just prior to the game because they feel it helps them focus during the game. And of course, that itself is going to prevent them from falling asleep when they're trying to go to bed 6 hours later. So when you're talking to athletes, it's really important to address this, because what happens is that poor sleep is associated with anxiety and depression. And in fact, if you treat the poor sleep, that'll help the anxiety and depression. And if you treat the anxiety and depression, it'll help the poor sleep, right? And the second thing is, so the other thing to remember is that if athletes don't get help for their sleep issues, they're going to go out and get medication. They're going to use somebody else. They'll use their spouse's medication, or they'll, like you said, they're going to use alcohol to treat their sleep issues. So it's really important to have, I will say candid, clear, honest, transparent conversations with players when you're trying to understand where they're coming from. You want to understand what issues are contributing to their sleep, what factors are contributing to their sleep issues. And another interesting thing is that it's not just their own stress that is affecting their sleep. Often it's expectations from their coaches, their family members, and the other competitors that actually result in the stress. Now, I know I'm giving you a long-winded answer to your question about the drugs, and I promise you we'll come to the medication here in a minute. But so the first thing, if you are talking to athletes and they're asking for medication, you really, like I said, you want to spend time, and you don't want to rush and misinformation, because if you're listening partially, you're going to come up with partial solutions. You want to because the bottom line is that the best way to treat insomnia complaints is with behavioral therapy, right? Or it's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is really, it retrains you how to sleep. And I have to tell you that once the season has begun, there is no time for the athlete to even do CBTI. And I know we now have other options like digital behavioral therapy. And again, they're not going to have time to do it. So really, if you have identified athletes who have issues with sleep, and especially if they know, if this is their second or third season, they know they always have issues with sleep during the season, you want to try and address this during your off season. Because that's when you want to, seek help. I mean, I see a lot of athletes during the off season, and we go over CBTI, meditation techniques, whatever it takes, because skill acquisition is something athletes understand. You learn these techniques during the off season so that you can use them later. And but when it comes to sleeping pills, I am going to answer that question. So now in clinical practice, when I'm seeing patients, and this applies to everybody, all sleep clinicians, insomnia medications, they're of multiple classes based on the mechanism of action. And what medication you want to use it's individualized based on a variety of factors like the patient's age, what other comorbidities they may have, the type of insomnia complaints, the side effect profile, the cost, clinician or patient preference. So, for example, if something's worked in the past, people are more likely to go for it. But when it comes to athletes, really the two main reasons where you would want to give them a sleeping pill would be A, if they have insomnia, right? So they've been diagnosed with insomnia.
Yep.
Or if they have a circadian rhythm disorder like jet lag, in which you can use melatonin. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But typically what you're describing is what happens in practice all the time, which is that athletes will use sleeping pills to treat that hyperarousal that we just talked about, the pre and the post-game anxiety. And so they're using it for its sedative action. And so these are not, they may not actually have a diagnosis of insomnia, right? So here are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. Number one is, we haven't really studied how sleeping pills affect the performance the next day in an athletic population where they don't have insomnia, where they're just using it for sedation. The second thing, of course, is that sleeping pills, when they're combined with alcohol and other drugs, can be dangerous. And we know the culture where after a game, it's good, athletes are using a couple of beers to help themselves wind down. You don't want them to be taking those sleeping pills with the alcohol. You don't want them to mix. Now, especially because when they're using it for occasional use, they may not be getting it from the team doctor, who may not even be aware of the fact that they're taking these pills, right? And then, of course, these sleeping pills have side effects themselves. They increase risks of accidents and other dangerous behaviors. I don't know if you know, but in the US, the FDA just came out with a new black box warning for all sleeping pills.
Really?
Yeah, in the last 1 month.
Ah.
So what they did is that they have been evaluating reports of rare but serious incidents that occur when users of medications experience like they're called complex sleep behaviors, like they're sleepwalking or sleep driving or engaging in other activities while not fully awake, so they don't form memory of it. And I think that they found that over the last 26 years, there were about 66 such incidences that they could ascribe to sleeping pills use. Now, if you take things in perspective, there are millions of sleeping pill prescriptions in the US. So 66 incidences seems very, very rare, but the FDA wants you to be hyper vigilant about it, right? So they want... Yeah.
I was going to say, is the same true then for malaria medication that causes some crazy behavior, like delirium and so on? Is that the same thing?
No. Well, are you asking about that side effect?
Yeah.
No. So what happens is that when you are taking a sleeping pill, and once you might have a incomplete arousal. So you might be awake and do things and go back to sleep, and not, because that arousal was incomplete, you may not be awake long enough to form memory of this. And so I've had incidences of, people who get up and drive or go to a bank and operate bank accounts, or, So in a sense, what you're describing is a side effect of the anti-malarial medications. So this is a separate side effect of sleeping pills, which, to be honest, the sleep clinicians and sleep scientists have been aware of. So this is not new. This is not new information. Because we have an opioid crisis in America, the FDA just wants to be hyper vigilant and wants physicians as well as patients to be aware of it. But the other thing is that I was just thinking about your question about sleeping pill use in athletes, and the one thing to remember is the appropriateness of using a sleeping pill to sleep well so that you can obtain performance enhancement of improved sleep the next day has been questioned. So I know Olympic champions have been placed on drug rehab due to their dependence on sleep medication. I think it was Australia, right? Australians recently banned all sleep medication use by their athletes once they were selected for Rio.
Yeah.
2016.
I had some issues with Stilnox sleep medication swimmers previously. And I think it comes back to that point about coming down from, swimming at night and so on, and travel, and the sort of the hyperarousal and the training, that inability to kind of switch off after different training sessions.
Right.
So yeah. What I am interested in, Meeta, as well is what about the long-term use of sleep medication by even non-elite athletes? Because my understanding was, from the data that I have looked at, that sleep medication in general can be basically, the efficacy is lost after 10 to 12 days, and it becomes basically, you might as well be taking a placebo. Is that true? Have I read that wrong?
Well, so the way that the recommendation of treating insomnia complaints is really first is CBTI or cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So medication is really meant for short-term use to help you tide over whatever complaints you have. There are, I know Ambien CR, which is one of the brand names of medication here, has been approved for long-term use, but there have been studies that have shown that long-term use of medication may be associated with increased mortality risks, increased accidents, certain chronic diseases, and so you have to be careful about taking them long-term. My suggestion is always take sleeping pills under the guidance of a sleep-trained clinician. That would be the bottom line.
This comes back to what we were saying earlier about like the lack of education for, general practitioners in medicine. Because when I ask these guys, how are you getting medication for 20 years? And it's like, my GP just writes me a script.
Yes.
And it's just constantly without any information or knowledge. I think, so you're right. I think it's a lack of frontline GPs having that information and knowledge around it. We're actually seeing the right person.
Right. I think there are two separate issues that are going on. Number one is that, the prevalence of people presenting with insomnia complaints to the primary care doctor is fairly high. It's really high, and not every clinician or facility has the ability to do cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to give a sleeping pill, right? So that, you have to keep that in mind, which is why I know actually David Cunningham, one of the physicians that I know him in Australia.
Yeah, David.
Right. And I know in Australia there are some good centers which do cognitive behavioral therapy and do digital cognitive behavioral therapy. That might be a solution to make sure that it's readily available to everybody. There's one interesting thing I wanted to mention here about, and again, I'm coming back to sleeping pills and their occasional use in athletes. There is one group that sleeping pill occasional use has been studied well in. That is military pilots.
Yes.
So scientists have really studied military pilots who have insomnia or sleep complaints, and they've used these short-term medications and used it to help their sleep, and looked at their effects the next day on their performance in complex flight situations. They've looked at both their physical and cognitive abilities. So in these situations, I looked at the literature. These prescription sleeping pills have proven to be both safe and effective. Yeah. So, and similarly, this work has been done in in astronauts. So because of the similarities in the unpredictable work hours and, the circadian disruption and the insufficient sleep that is common in these military flight operations or astronauts and professional athletes, maybe this research can serve as a guiding post for occasional hypnotic use, sleeping pill use in athletes. I mean, that's just something that more research has to be done on.
Yeah, this is why I want to get a very good friend of mine on the podcast as well, who I presume at some of his work you may have read, is a guy called John Caldwell.
Yes.
Yeah, so John's a very good friend of mine and collaborated on some of my research and was a co-supervisor of my PhD. And he's been around since probably the 70s doing work as an experimental psychologist in sleep with, astronauts, Navy Air Force, and, a whole host of pilots and people in that area. So, yeah, very, very interesting. So I want to get John on to talk further about that type of work. So it's interesting that you mentioned that because, there's also, I think on the back of that, there's also this thinking out there in the field, whether it be athletes or shift workers or general population, that us in the area of sleep, whether it be sleep physicians or in such as yourself, a board certified sleep medicine, or myself out in the field working with companies around shift work and application of these principles, a lot of people think that we have this nailed and we know exactly what to do. And people often get dismayed when I say to them, we still don't really know why we sleep. Whilst it's been around since the 60s as a discipline and sleep medicine for the last 30 odd years, it's still really early days. And if we look at all the research that's been published in that time, it just looks like, if we had to graph it, it would just look like a big hockey stick on the page because it's ever increasing. So we're knowing more and more every year and every week. And I think there's a lot of people contributing to the literature, but we're still in very early days and there's still lots and lots we do not know.
The one person I should introduce you to is Dr. Christopher Drake, who's the chief right now of sleep research at the Henry Ford Sleep Disorder Center. And he does a lot of research in shift work and, both behavioral as well as medical management. And that might be somebody you want to interview in the future sometime.
We definitely should have a chat. Yeah, I'm always interested in talking to people from all different aspects. So I've seen his name before, so I'll be definitely keen to have a chat if he's up for it. But I want to throw one more mix into our athlete conversation, because you've spoken a little bit about melatonin and you've spoken a little bit about jet lag as well. But so we keep kind of layering up this cake of this sleep mix with athletes. The other one that comes into it is jet lag, which is very complex because it's not just jet lag in terms of traveling somewhere and getting over it. It's travel to be ready for a specific time, such as a game, which may involve domestic travel like across the US, or international travel across multiple time zones, or even within a time zone going from, let's say, the US to Brazil. So what's the effect of that jet lag on athletic performance, and how is melatonin, or can melatonin be used to alleviate those effects?
So firstly, for your audience, let's just define jet lag. So jet lag is basically when you take a jet and you rapidly cross time zones, then when you get to your new destination, your biological clocks lag behind, and so that your circadian rhythms are scrambling to get synchronized to the new time zone, and that's what causes jet lag. And jet lag, and in fact any circadian rhythm misalignment, the primary goal is always to align the circadian timing of sleep and wake with the desired or new time zone. And so, really, when the approach to jet lag is, as you are well aware, is basically behavioral, and of course we'll talk about melatonin a little bit. So it really depends on the length of stay, how many time zones you're going to cross, the timing of the competition, and often athletes get there and they have to compete immediately once they get there, because it's in the middle of their season, so they're really busy. So I will typically draw out a plan and make recommendations about even, starting from what the flight timing should be, what time they should be sleeping, what time they should be awake. But the main tools, whenever you're trying to shift your clock to adjust to a newer time zone rapidly, is timed exposure to bright light or timed avoidance to bright light, right? That is the crux, right? And then, of course, in addition, we can use melatonin. So, again, let's just talk a little bit about melatonin. So melatonin is a natural hormone that's secreted in darkness. So it's really a darkness hormone. It's not really a sleep hormone because it's secreted in darkness. And what it does is it strengthens nighttime physiology. So in human beings, because we sleep at night, it increases sleepiness. But in nocturnal animals, secretion of melatonin actually increases activity. So calling it the sleeping hormone is really wrong.
Okay, this is interesting because I might be guilty of saying this incorrect as well. So it's the absence of light, the darkness. It's the absence of natural light, i.e. the darkness, that then promotes the onset of sleep. Is that correct?
Yes. So in darkness, melatonin is secreted, right? And melatonin's function is to emphasize nighttime physiology. And in diurnal animals like us, since we are awake during the day and at night we sleep, for us, it emphasizes sleep. So for us, it actually, the lack of melatonin during the day, it strengthens our wakefulness. And then at night, it helps consolidate and maintain our sleep. But in nocturnal animals, it maintains and helps increase activity. So the way exogenous melatonin. So if you take melatonin, the way it works is it has two mechanisms of actions. So the first is it's a phase shifter. So it can shift your biological clock. And in addition, you are right. So in higher doses in human beings, it can cause sleepiness. So which is why sometimes it's used as a sleeping pill. But it really depends on timing. So in effect, if you use it correctly and you're traveling east, you can use it in the evening to help you go to sleep earlier. So it shifts your clock, so it signals your body that you're ready to fall asleep earlier. And when you're traveling west, you can use it in the morning and it can help you go to bed later and stay in bed later. So that's the way it works. So, and the other thing to remember is that melatonin and light work in opposite directions. So if you have I lost you?
No, I'm here. Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
No, I'm here.
Okay. So if you were trying to go to bed earlier, so you were trying to shift your clock to an earlier time, you would take melatonin in the evening because it would help you go to bed earlier. But then you would expose yourself to bright light in the morning because it would do the same thing. It would help you to go to bed earlier, right?
We'll resynchronize you, yeah.
Right. So timing is really everything. Now, a couple of things you want, especially in the US, melatonin you can buy off the counter, and it's considered to be a natural sleep aid. So the two things you want to be careful about is that, first of all, contaminations, right? It may be adulterated with other sedatives. The second is, which is really important, is the timing. So if you take melatonin or even light at the wrong time, it can either have no effect or even worse, it can have the opposite effect of what you want to do.
Yeah, I think there's this is interesting points here. We talk about contamination for the athletes, or even for people who are in areas where you get drug and alcohol tested, because some of these medications we don't know how they're getting made. I know that other people have tested positive for steroids because they've been made in same areas. That's one area that maybe problematic. But also, like you say, in America, I believe in the US, you can get melatonin and it's in milligram form. So you know how much milligrams. Whereas here in Australia, when you buy melatonin over the counter, it's a herbal supplement and you have no idea what's in it. And
Yes.
so I had to
Yes.
say something like 5 times, 9 times, like a factor. And what is that? It's basically, it's very difficult to find out. So you don't actually know what's in it. So there may be no melatonin in it, or maybe 20 milligrams for all we know.
Exactly.
So it's very difficult.
So here in the US, I think the rule is that if the melatonin pill is ever tested, 2 years after it's been manufactured, it should at least have half the amount of melatonin. So sometimes manufacturers will put way more because they want to make sure that there's enough melatonin left in there. And so, yes, I will say the one thing I would like the audience to know is that melatonin is really, first of all, it's not a sleeping pill. The second thing is that really there are reasons why you want to use it, and that would be for jet lag, or if you're a night owl and you're trying to go to bed early. But again, it's best to do that after speaking to a clinician, so that because timing is really everything when it comes to melatonin use, and timing in association with light exposure. So it's pretty complex. So you shouldn't just take it and use it. I know because it has the natural supplement attached to it. People think it's very benign. And there's been some research showing how it can affect performance, even in an athlete the next day. The other thing is, we were talking about drugs. What I've found is marijuana, especially in the US, is being used quite a lot amongst athletes.
Really? And for what? For just relaxation after events or before events, or?
Well, so marijuana is getting a lot of attention from athletes because it's getting pressed as they want to use it as a pain management alternative as compared to opioids, which have got a bad name, to ease psychological stress, yes, for mood stability, for relaxation, for being in the moment, for socialization. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but the research is quite limited when it comes to marijuana. So, and its effect on athletes. So the first thing to remember is that there are 2 separate components in the marijuana plant. One is THC, which is the psychoactive component that gives you the high. And then there are cannabinoids.
CBD.
Right? And the CBD is the non-psychoactive. And these have been studied. And I want to say that there have been some studies that show that CBD will help with some sleep initiation or maintenance issues, although the research is somewhat preliminary. But when it comes to THC, which is the psychoactive component, there has been some research about the therapeutic use in helping the nausea or weight gain issues in chronic wasting in cancer or HIV and certain other musculoskeletal diseases. But the bad news is that there is definitely some research that shows that THC will significantly impair your judgment, your motor coordination, your reaction time, all of which affect athletic performance.
Yeah.
Right. And we know that the other thing is that's really interesting, Ian, is that if you take marijuana on a habitual basis, and once you stop smoking the marijuana, then within a week or so, one's going to develop withdrawal symptoms. So the withdrawal symptoms are really, they're irritability, anger, aggression, nervousness, anxiety, sleep issues, decreased appetite, weight loss, restlessness, and, like stomach aches, shakiness. So oftentimes when people say they're treating symptoms, what they're actually treating is symptoms of withdrawal.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is from the work that I've looked at, and there was a big review came out recently that I did an audio abstract on, and if memory serves me right, not only that, when you talk about all those kind of physical things that happen, when people withdraw from marijuana, they have a lot of REM rebound because REM has been suppressed. This REM rebound comes back. Like I had a guy in January of this year come up to me and he goes, hey, you do a lot of sleep stuff. I've given up marijuana. I smoked weed for like 16, 17 years. Man, I'm having the craziest, trippiest dreams. I went, probably REM rebound. It might go on for a few months. He's like, what? I said, you've suppressed REM so much that this is happening. And it went on for nearly 3 months. So he was having like waking up in the middle of the night sweating. He was having crazy, vivid dreams. He thought, you know, and I think again, if he wasn't informed of that and the fact that it was normal, he may have used marijuana to suppress that, which would have put back in that negative cycle. So once he knew it, he was like, so it's normal. I'm like, yeah. He goes, man, they're really trippy dreams. I said, just go through it and you'll be fine. And he did. After about 3 months, it stopped and he came back good.
Yeah, that is a very interesting story. You're absolutely right. So, you know, and it's like people taking opioids to treat stomach pain or tummy upset, you know, which is really a side effect of it's a withdrawal symptom from stopping the opioids. So it's what encourages use or repeated use. Yes, it's well. The other thing, you know, at least in the US, although marijuana is becoming legal in many states, you want to check with your sports or league because it's still a drug.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you're found to be using marijuana, even if it's legal and you may not be arrested, but you're going to be placed on a drug rehab program if you're ever tested.
I think this is rife personally. Like I do a lot of jiu-jitsu, which is similar to wrestling or grappling. And in the jiu-jitsu world, there's lots of marijuana getting smoked by people. In non-competitive environments and in competitive environments. Now, for me, it doesn't really matter because I don't compete. It's more of a social activity. But lots of people are smoking marijuana. Secondly, I came out of many years of running long-distance races, you know, up to 100 miles in one continuous go, and that's quite a strain on your body. And many athletes in the US do this and get sponsored and may undertake 10 of those 100-mile runs a year and more, you know, 70, 80-mile runs in between those. And it's come out in the last few years that many of those athletes are actually taking marijuana or smoking marijuana or, you know, consuming it in some form or the other, especially for those runners who like to hang around places like Colorado. And, you know, it's kind of then once you read these stories and you hear these things coming out, you're like, no wonder they can do these events because there's a lot of evidence out there showing that marijuana suppresses, you know, these pain receptors, and so they're gonna not feel the pain. And I can tell you one thing: you feel a lot of pain when you are running for 100 miles continuously, not only from sleep deprivation, but you are sore. So a lot of these guys taking these things,
right. Well, I
unfair advantage that way, but also, like we say, affecting their sleep and recovery.
Right. Well, I will bring up 2 points. The first is you're absolutely right. I mean, they're high while they're running, which is allowing them maybe to run far longer.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, you know, in response to that comment about running 100 miles, I'm happy to announce I'm never going to be doing that. So.
Oh, you will. You'll have a midlife crisis, Meeta, and you will want to do it. When you hit 40, you will want to do it.
Well, I have news for you then, because I hit 40 a long time ago, and I think the midlife crisis is the work that I do with the athletes. It's so interesting, you know. It's difficult to get off that bandwagon.
So I did my first 100-mile run in Leadville in Colorado when I was at the age of 34, and you know, I was saying to a guy, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm very busy on my job, you know, I work doing this kind of fatigue, human performance stuff for a mining company. I travel a lot. I'm really busy, and you know, I'm working on my master's as well, and blah blah blah. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm 57 and I'm a cancer research doctor and I run a clinic. So don't tell me you don't have much time. He goes, and I run 4 of these a year. I went, what? He goes, yeah, I run 4 of these a year, 4 100-milers. I said, how do you find time? He goes, I make time. I run down the stairs at lunchtime. I keep active. I do it. So don't cry about not having time. So I was like, okay, I'll keep my mouth shut. The next day we ran, he finished about 2.5 hours ahead of me.
I see. So, well, I remember a couple of years ago, I was helping helping with sleep with one of the Major League Baseball physicians, actually. He based at California, and he did these long endurance races. Personally, I play tennis and I do yoga, and I'm telling you, I'm quite sure that I need my motor coordination as well, my reaction. I mean, I have to think, especially when you're playing tennis, you have to think almost with every stroke.
Yeah.
I don't think marijuana is going to help that at all.
So the last area I want to talk about before we wrap it up this evening is around this area, like leading into or building upon the sports thing and into the general population. A lot of people are wearing these wrist-worn devices or wearable technologies, or putting apps on their phone to measure sleep, heart rate variability, activity, and sort of to give them some biofeedback. That can basically help people sleep better, as people say to me, and I find this interesting personally, which is there's lots of marketing in this area, which is not always backed up by science, and a lot of people, whether it be amateur, elite, or professional athletes, want to go with the marketing tool as opposed to the scientific fact or the scientific data. What's been your experience in this area?
Well, first of all, sleep wearable devices are everywhere. And again, I'd like to bring up the snake oil analogy here. So the first thing is that I think sleep wearables, when it comes to doing large research projects, is wonderful. I mean, you have the ability, and I know you've used, in your research, you've used some of the wearables to help collect data that you otherwise may not have been able to get. And when you're collecting data in response to a question, a research question, that makes complete sense. But, if you're wearing a sleep wearable to help you sleep better, it's not going to do it. That's the bottom line. I mean, right?
I fully agree. I'm just nodding my head here because I think this is not just with sleep wearables, but technologies that we put in trucks and mining or anything else. People kind of put these technologies on or put them into a truck or put an app on their phone, and then they go, "Hey, Ian, I got that technology, and I'm actually, it's telling me I'm not sleeping very well, or I'm still having fatigue events, or I'm still tired." Yeah, because all you have now is some method of measuring that. There is no silver bullet. There is no. It's not artificial intelligence. It's not calculating how to keep you, sedated for longer or put you asleep for different times, or, it's not that clever. It's giving you information. But now what has to happen is you, as the user, have to make decisions. But you're not informed to make those decisions. So now you're kind of back to square one. And if you're a bit of a stress head, the data that's coming out may make you actually feel worse than what you are, because now you're stressing about the information.
Right. You hit all the right points. So firstly, I'm not very sure and of how accurate that information you're getting is, right? So these, what they're trying to measure, basically their actigraph, they measure movements, they infer sleep. But having said that, they've added heart rate variability and other metrics to help them be more accurate. Having said, but if the question is how much you're sleeping, I have to say you already know how much you're sleeping, right? I mean, you don't need a device to tell you how much sleep you're getting. Now, if you were getting 5 hours, if you were getting only 5 hours in bed, whether it was because your neighbor kept you awake because they were loud, or because you came in on a late flight and didn't get enough time in bed, or you have a sleep disorder that prevents you from getting more than 5 hours, or you're a night owl, and even though you spend 9 hours in bed, you didn't fall asleep till about 3 a.m. There can be multiple reasons why you were getting less sleep. And until and unless your wearable can tell you why you're getting less sleep, it can't come up with solutions. It can't tell you what to do with that information, which is what you were saying. The second thing is, yes, especially in athletes, because nowadays there is a lot of press about how and why sleep is important for athletes. The last thing you want is an athlete to wake up and look at their wearable and say, oh, I didn't get enough sleep, I'm going to do poorly. They don't need that information. That is not information they need. I always say wearing, the invention of the weight scale did not cure obesity. You could use these devices to gather some sort of information, but you still have to do the work with yourself, which is exactly what you were just saying a minute ago.
Yeah. No, and I think it's I think that's dead right. I like that analogy about the weight scales, because you're right. We've got kind of, in the Western world, particularly Western Europe, US, North America, and in Australia, we're probably getting fatter and sicker than we ever have been. So the weighing scales certainly didn't solve that one. So I'm sort of smiling here and going, I'm going to use that analogy as pretty good. But I think as well, once you delve into the actigraphs, if you think about, which we've spoken about in this podcast before, which is about, if we look at the hierarchy of sleep measurement, obviously in laboratory PSG being the kind of the best possible thing you can do, in lab PSG, followed by levels 2, 3, and 4 in home-based environments. And as you go down from 2 to 3 to 4, you have less data you're collecting. And then we kind of jump into this actigraphy field. And then I like to expand that actigraphy field again. And I think there may be need to have classifications of actigraphy. So, for example, at the top, in research, we would use things like validated actigraphy devices. And I'm going to give a shout out here and mention a product, because they've been extremely kind to me over the last few years and provide me with free devices and services and support during my PhD, and with some other students I'm supervising now, and that's the Fatigue Science Ready Band.
Yes, I know them. I know them.
Which you would know them, and they've been really like a great, strong supporter of my work in the field, and that's why I want to give them a shout out there as well. And that sort of device, which we validate in the laboratory here against another device called the Actigraph, which is a trademark device, and then against polysomnography simultaneously. And if you look at those type of devices in that bracket, I think there's like a level 1 device that needs to be in there, that can be, that's been peer reviewed, published, and is out there and is agreed upon as this is a pretty good device for collecting measures over time in shift workers, athletes, and so on. And we know it's not going to be exactly the same as PSG, but it's a good happy medium. And I think after that, then we start moving down into sort of level 2 devices, if you want to call them those, which might be our classic Fitbits, Jawbones, and so on. And then we might move down into level 3 wrist-worn devices, which may be other type devices that are more like a sports watch, but do kind of capture some sleep, like a Garmin or a Suunto. Now, I'm just throwing examples into those buckets. That mightn't be exactly what they are, but I think there's probably space that's required there to be filled around the levels of the actigraphy. And then we jump into the final area, which is non-validated, probably / non-useful / crap devices, which is apps on your phone. Apps on your phone or other sort of, crappy devices that are out there. And unfortunately, not to my knowledge, nobody has kind of categorized the devices outside of PSG levels 1 to 4 to make that distinction between them. So when people, such as researchers or even practitioners or performance coaches with teams, they don't really know what's good and what's not, or neither do athletes. Because I've had athletes come to me and go, I want to get that product because I saw an ad for it and it's great. And I'm like, well, it's not validated.
Why?
Yeah, but it looks good. And blah, blah, blah wears it. And I saw an elite footballer wear it. Yeah, but it's a crap measure. It's not going to give you anything. We can't extract the data. We're not going to, well, I don't want to do that one there that you say is validated. I don't like the look of it. And so the whole marketing thing takes over, and it gets really frustrating for people like us, I think, in the field.
Right. So I will say a couple of things. Number one is that whoever manufactured that and gave it to the NFL or the football player, remember the player may be being paid to wear it.
That's right. One. Yes. Yeah.
Number one. So you have to always remember that. The second thing is that and I'll tell you from personal experience, I have had players have their girlfriends wear it when they want to go out in town if they don't want you to know what they're up to. So nothing beats education. You know, I always tell people that, you know, sleep is this private thing that you do in your own bedrooms. I can give you all the information in the world. You have to buy in. You have to buy in to decide. You know, you have to understand why you'd rather not go out and sleep and spend, you know, 8 hours in bed versus going out because you know it affects your performance the next day. So really, you know, education is important because that's how people will make choices, right? It's not wearing a device. The third thing is that I don't know what are they doing with all this data they're collecting? Who does this data belong to? You know, that's something to be careful about. I know the NFL Player Association a couple of years came out and they said they did not want that teams could not force them to wear these devices because this was, you know, this was their private time when they were at home, when they were wearing it. So there are multiple things we can come up with. I know there's a new sleep disorder called, is it orthosomnia? I'm again blanking on the name, which is basically anxiety that is related, which is insomnia, which is caused because of using these wearables, right?
It's not normophobia, is it? No,
it's ortho. So I'm gonna remember as soon as we put down the phone, you know. And then you know, finally, I know. So right now, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine's national meetings are going on, which I was traveling so much for work because it's the NFL mini camp. So all the teams are in mini camp right now, but. So I haven't been able to go to that, but I know there were large symposiums on this. So we will, you know, this is a good space to watch because more research-based practice parameters are soon going to be established, which will help us, you know, how to use and categorize.
I think Michael Gradner put up some pictures yesterday on Twitter from the conference this week about, you know, kind of standing room only and the session on wearable devices. Yep. And I think you're right. So myself and Michael are speaking in the same session. Michael organised a symposium for World Sleep, and he invited me along. So I'm gonna catch up with him at World Sleep, and I want to actually talk to him about this area as well, because I know he's quite vocal on Twitter about this area. And I think you're right. I think it's definitely, you know, one to watch. Right. The normophobia, just coincidentally, was another paper that I published on with Madison Jones, and that's about this. It's the fear of missing out, or the irrational fear of not having your phone. So I knew it was electronic devices. So it's people basically not having their mobile phone with them. That's what it is, which causes stress, which also leads to people not being able to sleep because they might be stressed out that happened. You know, contacted family or friends or looked up what's on Facebook. More so in younger athletes.
Yeah, it's called orthosomnia. Orthosomnia is when, you know, when this quantified self movement, and it's actually causing more stress and causing issues with sleep. And I think I know that I'm going to be at that same meeting because I'm talking at another symposium about jet lag in athletes at the World Sleep meeting. So
this is going to be great. All the Twitter sleep geeks are finally going to get into one room together and have coffee and and be face to face. It'll be quite the geek convention talking about sleep. People often say to me, "How do you just talk about sleep the whole time?" I'm like, I'm fascinated by it. Like, they go, "You're just a geek," and I'm like, "Yeah, but there's loads of sleep geeks that like it." So when the sleep geeks get together, it's going to be fun. So that's what I enjoy about these conferences.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, because it is late in the evening here, and I know you got a day ahead of you in the US. What's the kind of takeaways that you may give to the audience from today's conversation that they could take away and maybe, you know, use in regards to sleep?
Well, you know, just a couple of things. Number one is I like to tell people that peak performance is an output of a well-rested body and brain, right? And to be excellent in any sport, or actually to be excellent in any organization, you have to draw on discretionary energy, not just run-of-the-mill ordinary energy. And I know I put my discretionary energy on things that I care about. Now, if you don't get enough sleep, first of all, you don't have that reservoir of discretionary energy. But research also shows that people don't care as much if you don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
So, and that's really important for athletic organizations and actually for day-to-day life for all of us, right? And so that's the first. And the second is that you spend a third of your life sleeping, right? And we're always trying to look for any small limiting factor that we can change to make our lives better. And if you can improve your life, your sleeping, even if you can make small tweaks in your sleep, that will make a big difference to your well-being and performance the next day. So, I think this is a really cool field, and there's so much one can do.
Yeah. No, that's great. Look, I think it's great. I think there's lots to do. There's still lots to talk about. We've gone there for an hour and a half, and I think we could go for another 2 or 3 hours. Particularly if we had a whiteboard and we're face to face, we could go all day and talk about this until we fell asleep. But I know that listeners are probably gone, enough, give us a break. So we're going to leave it there, Meeta. And it was thanks very much for making the time available today. It was great to finally talk to you. And like you said, we will catch up face to face in September at World Sleep, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah. Thanks again.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you.
No problem.
Hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Singh. Lots of information there about sleep and performance if you're an elite athlete, an amateur athlete, or you're just looking for some tips on sleep and performance. Don't forget to head over to Twitter and follow Dr. Singh. And as always, you can get in contact with us through the website sleep4performance.com.au, or you can contact me at iandunican@sleep4performance.com.au. Until next time, sleep well.